Hello, everybody. My name is Orsola de Castro, and I am the co-founder of Fashion Revolution and the creative director. Fashion Revolution was born in 2013 as a result of the Rana Plaza disaster. I'm sure most of you in here will be familiar of that horrendous event. And the Fashion Revolution team had been already involved in sustainability in fashion, and that was the moment that we all got together. And in a very short space of time, we were joined globally by other teams and other individuals who were really ready to start making a change and making a difference, proving to us that the misery of the people making our clothes is something that we collectively need to beat, need to be aware of, and need to do as much as we can as campaigners and individuals to create change. So for Fashion Revolution, transparency has been a guiding light. We see transparency very much as the first step towards a more sustainable fashion industry. And as a result of that, we started with a really simple question, which of course took the form of a hashtag, because we were born at the age of social media, so this is how we communicate. But the hashtag, "Who Made My Clothes?" is very much the battle cry of a global movement. Fashion Revolution is now present in over 90 countries, and I really want to take this opportunity to thank the local team in Hungary and Gabby, our country coordinator, and the team over there, because we are Fashion Revolution and you are Fashion Revolution. So the importance of our local team is so vast for the movement. So I beg of you all to follow them and check what your local team is doing. But basically, one simple question: who made my clothes? Which we knew would have been very difficult to answer, because if there was one thing that Rana Plaza showed us, was that brands had no idea of who made their clothes and where their clothes were being made. So we went from the celebrities to, people working in the fashion supply chain, people working in fashion, and individuals. And in 2014, everyone was asking who made my clothes. And as I said, millions of times that this hashtag has been used. Fashion Revolution has grown as a movement, and we really were proud when the Who Made My Clothes hashtag turned spontaneously into the I Made Your Clothes. And it showed us that the people that do work in the fashion supply chain, the people who make our clothes, really do want to be a part of the conversation if they can, if they are allowed to do so. And this was a game changer for us. And I think for many people that followed the fashion revolution. Although it's a little bit premature to talk to you about all of the amazing things that we will be doing during Fashion Revolution Week 2021, I think it's important to say that we follow somehow 3 conversations via our 3 hashtags. So the first one is Who Made My Clothes? And it really looks at the social implication of the clothes that we all wear. Fashion affects 100% of the population. And every morning when you put your clothes on, you can ask yourself some very difficult questions in order to become a part of the solution. And the way that garment workers are treated, the way that supply chain workers are treated is incredibly important. We need to know that our clothes are made in dignity. Never mind where, but made by people that are fairly paid, treated with dignity, and in safe environmental working condition. Of course, we know that the fashion industry has an incredible impact in terms of our planet when it comes to pollution and toxicity. So we recently launched another hashtag, which is What's in My Clothes, which really inspires citizens all over the world to look at clothes a little bit the way that we look at food. You know, you wouldn't really dream of buying something without knowing the sell-by date or what were the ingredients. Does it contain any harmful chemicals in? And yet, because fashion is an unregulated industry, we can't really ask those same questions to the brands and expect a transparent reply. So materials are incredibly important. And of course, as Dilys Williams says, the two fundamental part of anything that is next to your skin is nature and labor. We also want to somehow celebrate that labor by keeping our clothes as long as we possibly can and treat them with respect. So our third hashtag is loved clothes last. And it does encourage citizens and people to look after the clothes that they already wear. We know that there is a massive shift towards people really wanting to understand more and wanting to hold brands accountable. And we know that if there was a choice, people would look for a more sustainable brand. And in particular, when it comes to the ingredients that make our clothing, there is really very, very little information. We know that the majority of our clothes are made of blended fabrics, that is cotton and polyester. We know that most of these materials will not biodegrade in landfill, and yet brands continue to push massive and massive amounts of clothes for which there is absolutely no origin or traceability when it comes to their original, material in which they are made. The statistics are terrifying, particularly when it comes to toxicity. And I think what's important to understand is when we talk about water, there is a statistic that says we use X amount of liters, 2,000, to make a t-shirt. I think what's important is to remember that water is constantly recycled. So if we were not to contaminate that water with all of these harmful chemicals, the problem wouldn't exist in the first place, except the materials that make up our clothing really are drenched with toxicants. In particular, recent discoveries have emphasized polyester and polyester shedding. And like each wash can shed up to 700 million polyester microfibers that have been found from the bottom of the sea to the top of the Mount Everest. They've even been raining in London recently. Again, this is because of our insatiable appetite for cheap and even cheaper clothing. Polyester and plastic clothing is a really important topic when it comes to Fashion Revolution, in particular Fashion Revolution Week, because it's when we can really galvanize people to understand that the impact of the materials that we choose to wear is phenomenal, and that if we all were to read the labels properly and demand the brands give us the correct information to make more informed choices, we really could have an active role. We are simply prevented from doing so because the brands have no legal obligation to disclose. I do apologize for that. My phone is on Do Not Disturb. I'm sorry. So continuing with the presentation, this is why last year we launched Who Made My Clothes? What's in my clothes, apologies, which is the new hashtag, and we hope that you will all ask brands to give us this vital information that could make us better citizens and better fashion consumers at the same time. Because, of course, this is one of the most beautiful quotes by a colleague of mine, Celine Seaman: everything we make returns to the earth, either as food or as poison. And this is particularly important when we look at the state of overconsumption and waste. Now, this is a really topical moment to speak about overconsumption and waste, because in the majority of the world, we've well, I don't want to use the word celebrated, but in the majority of the world, we have just gone through Black Friday weekend. Yesterday was Cyber Monday. And the reality is that when we look at overproduction, we know that the degradation is 360 degrees throughout the supply chain. Garment workers are degraded while they produce quantities that are excessive. They're not trained enough to be able to become upskilled, because what matters to the brands is quantity, 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 and quantity. The soil is degraded because of having to reabsorb waste that has not been designed to decompose or biodegrade. And everything else in between is touched by the way that we mass produce our clothing. From countries who are receiving too much of our secondhand waste, to the producing countries, as we've seen during COVID, that are producing so much materials, so many clothes, that often there isn't a way realistically to absorb them. The statistics, this is an old statistics, but the statistics speak very, very loudly. Around 150 billion garments of clothing, and this is a statistic of 2015. We know that statistics aren't ever the most reliable, that they change, that they swish, but it gives us an indication of excess. 150 billion garments of clothing for 7.7 million of us. I mean, this is really something that makes no logical sense. It makes no logical sense because it means that a huge majority of the clothes that we see in circulation were actually designed to go straight into landfill because there aren't enough people to consume them and buy them. So, you know, that is approximately 1 truck per second of clothing going into landfill. So what's that got to do with the exploitation of workers? And for Fashion Revolution, there is a very clear link between the lack of transparency, the exploitation of supply chain workers, and the waste that we all somehow are a part of generating. And that would be that without transparency, without straight on visibility as to what the brands are actually doing, we cannot hold them accountable. So for instance, we have zero idea when it comes to brands how many numbers of clothing they are producing per year. And yet we know that the majority of those clothes are often made by garment workers that are working in unsafe conditions, that are not allowed to unionize, and that are working in a state of exploitation, just as much as resources around them are also exploited. So the truth is that in an industry that is efficient and in an industry which is prevailed by common sense, these excesses should have been sorted out a long time ago. Instead, we find ourselves nowadays in the position where we may be relying on technology to facilitate, for instance, our shopping habits, but technology is making something more convenient because we are all bowing to Her Majesty Queen Convenience, but what is convenient for us might have a very detrimental effect on the environment. So I'd like to just take a few seconds to talk about the issue of returns, as the slide shows, because this is a relatively new conversation, but one that people that work in the fashion industry have been aware for a long time, that everything that we return, the majority of what we return, is not resold. The habit that many of us, well, I don't, but some people would have of ordering several pieces online, maybe trying them for size, and then returning a majority of them. Now, this is convenient. Of course, it's convenient. Somebody comes to your doorstep, brings you the clothing, waits downstairs, you try, and brings them back for you. But what if all those pieces of clothing were then deemed waste? What if we don't then have the technology or the willingness to put them back in circulation? Because you can understand that these gigantic brands operate from gigantic warehouses, and actually to bring back all returns into circulation would imply a very, very different system, which is one to get rid of. We would need to create a system to somehow keep things. And this is part of one of the biggest losses, in a way, of the fashion industry, this loss of common sense and loss of traditions that have accompanied us for millennia. Of course, there is a change in the horizon. I wouldn't want to call it cloud or silver lining, because obviously this excess of waste, these clothes that are made from materials that cannot be recycled because they're blended, these clothes that are made in excess by people that are poorly paid, are in excess themselves. And so we are seeing really a kind of a rebirth of the secondary market. I say rebirth because anyone as old as me will remember that actually in the 1980s, and then again in the 90s, wearing vintage was very, very cool indeed. So suddenly it's becoming cool, not just because it looks cool, but because it does good to the environment, to prevent clothing from being incinerated and landfilled. Of course, brands are clocking onto this. The secondary market is growing 10 times faster than fast fashion. And so we are beginning to see an opportunity presenting itself for keeping and managing our hoarding of clothing better. But make no mistake, not one single thing will ever work unless it is combined with others. So when we talk about the chemical recycling of clothing, for instance, on which there is a huge amount of investment, but we're nowhere near there yet. We can't imagine the panacea of the recycling and still be producing 150 billion garments of clothing per year, and still be exploiting the workers who make them, and still refuse to publicly disclose your supply chain so that governments and organizations on the ground and vigilant citizens can actually scrutinize the work of the brands. So there is a tendency in this industry to somehow glorify the one thing or sensationalize. And the reality is that we actually need to tone our language, to be accurate, to be adequate, and to speak the truth. And the truth is not sensational. The truth also comprises the mistakes that we make, as well as the successes that we see on this journey. So it's always a mixture. And for people who consume fashion, who use fashion, who wear fashion, there are always multiple ways that we can become a part of the solution. So again, for some of you, for some of you, it will be being very invested in human rights and campaigning for brands. And I please suggest that you check our website and the page of your local fashion revolution team so that you can activate to brands in a more technical way, sending an email or sending a postcard demanding to know who made your clothes. Some of you will be more interested in the quality and therefore activate with brands and look for better materials, while some of you will be radical, pioneering campaigners and will say, I'm never going to buy anything, or I will buy nothing for another year. But we can all activate to become better citizens and better users of fashion. And don't think that the fashion supply chain is somewhere far away, because the fashion supply chain is in your bedroom every morning when you wake up. From the second you buy something, you are responsible for the rest of its life. So we are as well in the fashion supply chain. So look at your own clothing with respect, with creativity. Know that if you look at them with respect, you are also fundamentally applying some of that respect to the people who made them. Don't think that fashion is frivolous, because it is a gigantic industry. And don't think that sustainability or saving the planet is far away from you. It's not. It's the small things that we do every day. It's how we talk truth to power, our power, your children's school, your church, your library, wherever that be. But we don't have very much time. We all wear clothes. We all have something that we can do. So follow Fashion Revolution and join us on this journey. And now I can press that. Thank you.